Welcome back to another episode of the Aquademia podcast. I'm your host, Justin Grant.
And I'm Maddie Cassidy.
And today we are excited to welcome a guest whose career spans nearly 3 decades at one of the most recognized names in food retail, Whole Foods Market.
Yes, we are so excited to have Wes Rose join us today on the podcast. Wes began his journey behind the seafood counter at Whole Foods Market in Massachusetts back in 1998. And today he serves as the Senior Vice President of Merchandising for Perishables. From the seafood counter to the executive suite, Wes has helped shape how Whole Foods approaches quality, ethical sourcing, and responsible seafood standards.
In this episode, we'll talk about Whole Foods' new Seafood Code of Conduct, the evolving landscape of seafood certifications, and how companies can build trust with sustainability-minded consumers. Whether you're in the seafood industry or just curious about where your food comes from, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. And as a reminder, if you want to follow Aquademia on social, we are on X at Aquademia Pod. If you want to contact the podcast for any reason, you can do so by filling out our online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast.
And if you enjoy this episode and you don't want to miss another one, be sure to subscribe to Aquademia on your podcast platform of choice.
And we'll see you at the end.
Welcome to the Aquademia podcast.
Our diet is hurting the environment in myriad ways. I mean, we desperately need to eat more seafood.
This is a pioneering industry with a whole lot of people who have really good ideas and a lot of experience and are unafraid.
Aquademia is your go-to podcast for a fresh take on all things seafood.
Wes, thank you so much for joining Maddie and I on the Aquademia podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
We're really excited. We got an email from your team seeing that there was interest to get you on the podcast. There absolutely was. We have a whole list of questions we want to get through, and we're going to jump right into it.
Sounds great.
So, starting off with your journey. Your journey with Whole Foods began behind the seafood counter in Massachusetts, not too far from us here in Portsmouth. How has that hands-on start shaped the way you lead at the executive level today, especially in the seafood merchandising and sourcing?
My journey started 28 years ago at the Fresh Pond store in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so that experience has really set me up for this long and great career that I've had at Whole Foods. I had a team leader. His name is Luis. He's actually a team leader still in one of our stores in Boston at the Ink Block store. Yeah, still there. Shout out to Luis. But he was really unique in the way that he trained his team members. And he worked primarily during the evenings, which is rare for someone who's in charge of making the schedule. Usually they're out of there by 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so as a new guy coming into the program, I had this great opportunity to work side by side with him. And he was already a seasoned veteran at that point. And so he really taught me everything there was to know about seafood at retail. And so what it meant about customer service and quality, assortment, selection, really how to set up a case, how to break it down, all those things that I've taken with me, since the start of my career. And so a big part of Whole Foods Market is you're this kind of store within a store. So you're understanding like the profit and loss of a single department within a larger store. And so that was, from like a business perspective, you're really learning how it's meant to operate and what controls you have and what levers you need to pull throughout your journey. Additionally, now that I'm in this role and I'm, my team is responsible for the programs and the assortment planning and promotions and everything else is really grounded in what does it take to execute that at store level. We can't do anything sitting in our office here in Texas without our 550 stores and the team members within them being able to have the knowledge and experience and the information needed to execute those programs. And so that to me is, a huge part of the journey I've been on. And I was just out in California visiting stores in LA and just had a chance to kind of reinforce that same piece where it's getting direct feedback from our team members and what their experiences are like, what their challenges are, and how we can really help and improve their experience for our customers.
Yeah, I'm sure that experience gives you a really valuable perspective in your current role of having started where a lot of those hands-on people on the ground were, like you've been there. And so it gives you that extra layer of perspective that other leaders might not have.
Yeah, I love it. And I just getting in store, on a regular basis for me is such a meaningful experience, right? It really reconnects me with what we're trying to accomplish. And it's changed a lot. I haven't worked in a store in, almost 20 years. Things have evolved, right? Everything that we've asked the team to do on a daily basis is different. And so getting grounded in that experience really helps us make sure that what we're asking them to do is executable.
So one thing that Whole Foods Market is known for is its really high standards with the products that it sources. So can you walk us through, for our listeners who might not know, what are the core pillars of Whole Foods Market's seafood code of conduct, and what sets it apart from other sourcing policies that are out there?
I'll start kind of as a big picture around, since I've worked for the company. So in 1998, we always had some sort of standards in place around even like our own kind of red list back in the day before they really existed, right? We didn't sell Chilean sea bass or even swordfish when I first started. In 1999, we started working with MSC, working with them on sustainable seafood. And that was kind of our first kind of step forward to having a sustainable seafood program. Since then, we've really evolved those standards, including adding in our Seafood Watch program as the next kind of layer on top of our wild program. So that's like the big pieces for us around like the sustainability side of it. Since then, right, this is kind of like, I'm sure as you guys are well aware, as you kind of learn more and the sectors evolve, there's so much that there is left to tackle. And so our standards are just these living and breathing documents that we work really closely with our suppliers on. And so last year, we took the step forward around launching that seafood code of conduct. It was a really big step for us, knowing how important, social responsibility is in the supply chain. And as you all know, that the complexity of a seafood supply chain is unlike anything else that I think we work with. And so the big focuses of that, which covers all of our fresh, frozen, and canned, including sushi, is really about, time spent at sea, maximum work hours, making sure that there's ethically recruitment happening for all the fishers on wild capture boats, access to communication, so making sure that they're not just stuck at sea for months on end without access to that communication piece, including installing Wi-Fi and things like that. And then just health and safety, kind of basic measures of health and safety on vessels. So ensuring, kind of those basics is a good step forward. I think we see this as, again, this is a starting point for us. And so we're now working through our supply chain. So every partner in our supply chain, every company that we work with is a part of this, and they have to do their due diligence as well to support this work. And so that's a big part of our kind of path forward over the next couple of years, is really bringing the rigor to this area as we have when it came to sustainability, as well as like farm raising seafood to a higher standard.
What did that process look like of creating the code of conduct? Like, I know you mentioned your suppliers, so how did you engage with them in order to come up with this robust code?
First, it starts with a lot of internal learnings. So we've hired on some staff. So we have a great quality standards team that includes social responsibility. We kind of deep dive these topics to really understand what are the challenges that we need to solve, right? To make sure that we fully understand them before we go out there and try to solve them. And so that work is kind of the last couple of years around really like hiring, getting educated on it. And it's one of those things, it's like once you go and do all that work, it's like, oh, there's only one path here. Our only path is to do something, right? Is we can't, now that we know what we know, right, we have to go down this road. And so that was kind of step one, right? We're engaging with NGOs and groups who are working in this space to learn as much as we can. And then from there, it is like once we have a foundation of a policy, then it's about working with our supplier community to say, here's what we're going to do, right? Here's how we're thinking about it, approaching this. And depending on how big or small some of these things are, will depend on how many people we talk to and how much feedback we get. But ultimately, we kind of crowdsource that information and get to a place where it's like, okay, we're comfortable now with getting this policy out to the public.
We know very well, because we create standards here at GSA as well, and that whole process is very similar to how your approach is. And it's always been intriguing to me because of how complicated it can get, because seafood, just the supply chain in general is just this giant path from the beginning stages to ending up on your plate. And so there's just so much to learn, but at the same point, there's a ton of innovations that are taking place. I mean, you mentioned Wi-Fi on vessels. That hasn't always been a capability, something we weren't even talking about years ago.
Yeah, that piece is really important. I was up in Alaska just a couple weeks ago, and that experience, like seeing them connected to satellite Wi-Fi, in the most remote parts of the world, and being able to get real-time data, right, from a fishery perspective out to, the people who really need it to make decisions around opening or closing a fishery or whatever it may be. So I do think that ability to have more transparency and more real-time information is right at our fingertips now. It's not this like, oh, how are we going to do this, right? Because I think if you go back a few years, it was always about the information is really old by the time you get it. And now it's available at almost any minute.
So speaking of evolving, in what ways has Whole Foods evolved its approach to responsible seafood? And Wesley, you may have talked a little bit about this already, but how has Whole Foods evolved its approach to responsible seafood sourcing in the last decade? And how do you see it continuing to evolve in the future?
At this point, we've kind of built out a really strong program for sustainable sourcing, and that is inclusive of wild capture, farm-raised seafood, and now kind of the social accountability or social responsibility side of it. It is a living, breathing program that we have in place, and so we continue to evolve that. And as there's more, industry continues to move forward, different certifiers or certification schemes come online, we're also always benchmarking our programs against what is available in the marketplace. I think we all know that the challenging part is this, there's a lot of labels, there's a lot of, certifiers. And what does that mean for a customer when they come up to the seafood case or they're at the frozen doors trying to figure out what they want to have for dinner? And so that's our big question is like, ultimately, how do we make that as easy as possible for them to engage with us? And so part of our sort of evolution is continuing to have really strong foundational programs that are, publicly available, have all the traceability requirements that we need. And from there, ensure that we are continuing to evolve and be ready and see around corners to what is next, right? And we have to make hard decisions at times around, are we going to carry particular items or, we've had it before where something goes from yellow to red on the Seafood Watch program. And what does that mean for our business? Ultimately, those are hugely impactful to our program. But that's the one thing that I will say, like, is always true at Whole Foods is like, we never walk them backwards, right? We continue to say, this is our bar that we've set and it's out there publicly and we are going to maintain that. And so that gives customers that trust. And so at the end of the day, all the labels and all the, the words, they matter. But what matters most is that trust that we built with our customers to say, this is a sustainable seafood department at Whole Foods Market, and you can feel comfortable buying product from us.
Yeah, that point that you made about all of the messaging that consumers get is so well taken by us. We hear that all the time from people, that there's just so much information out there and confusion and complexity that it makes it so hard to make any decision when you get to the seafood department, because you're just like, okay, well, first I need to figure out what species I even want to be eating, like very different from chicken or beef or pork. And then once you've made that decision, it's like, well, how do I know that this is quote unquote good seafood or responsible seafood? It's just so hard for consumers to connect with that, because the seafood industry it's a little more unknown for consumers compared with these terrestrial proteins, where people can easily conjure up an image in their heads of what a cow farm looks like.
Sure. It's so interesting because now my career has taken me into all these other categories. And so I have a good kind of understanding of how they work. And I will say, like, in general, right, customers are just, I don't know if they want to know. You have that like small percentage of people who really want to dive in deep and understand their food system at a deeper level. I think a lot of people are just like, to your point, like they're on the surface and they're just like trying to figure out, what do I want to have for dinner tonight? And is my seafood fresh? And so that's the other side of, we launched this year a fishmonger apprentice program where it's about training our team members behind the counter to be able to have the product knowledge to answer those questions for the customers who, depending on what level of depth they want to go with us, we're ready to take them there. But, it starts with, hey, tell me, I'm interested in having seafood for dinner tonight, right? Tell me what came in today, or tell me what is looking really good today, and what should I, put on the grill tonight.
That's a really good point, because we've done market research on what consumers are looking for. You talked about trust as being one of the biggest factors. So someone's going in, they're bombarded by a ton of different eco labels and signs, and they're maybe saying, okay, well, I know that this means something good. And if they want to learn more, they now have an employee that they can talk to and get more information if that's the route they want to go. Or probably the majority say, I trust this label, I trust Whole Foods. Let's throw a bunch of shrimp in the basket and go.
Shrimp on the bobby. So going off of that, Whole Foods works with a variety of different seafood certifications groups, like you've mentioned, MSC, Seafood Watch, and you've had those relationships for many, many years now. So how does Whole Foods evaluate which certifications to trust and put on the shelves and put your stamp of approval of, like, this is what Whole Foods considers sustainable/responsible seafood?
It's one that our team is actively involved in on a regular basis as these things progress. And so I talked a little bit about it earlier around like the benchmarking work that goes on to understand, okay, let's compare programs against each other to understand the rigor that they have, the depth that they have, and does it meet sort of like the baseline requirements that we put in place to basically meet our bar of sustainability. And so that's sort of like the initial practice that we go into place with and say, okay, where do these live? And then it is a little bit about understanding what opportunities working with additional certifiers or programs would present our customers, right? So there is that balance around adding another certifier or another certification creates some opportunity for confusion. And so we take that part really seriously as well around, okay, are we going to do this? What's the benefit of doing this? And so, maybe one policy has greater focus on human rights, and that's a gap in another policy, and that's something that we want to add in here. And so those are places where we look for it as does it improve our overall program? And then ultimately, does it help us meet our customers' needs? Because at the end of the day, like, we do all of these things because we believe, number one, they are the right thing to do. But number two, our customers come to us because of that. We have these programs in place and the trust that we built that we talked about. And so that, those are kind of like the paramount things around, like, does it help expand our program? Does it help continue to build that trust with our customers? And then ultimately, that's when we start getting into, like, now what does it look like to actually put it in place, right? It's like, does it require, additional audits or some sort of additional paperwork, or the team member training element, like we talked about at the beginning? We want that knowledgeable team member to be able to say, this is what this program means. This is why we have it in our case. And this is what it means for you as a customer if you want to get to that level of information. So it's one that we honestly, we do, depending on the program that we're talking about, we are actively always looking, but it is something that we take really seriously, and we don't generally add them in very often. It does take, usually 5 or 10 years before we do something like that.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point about how the information has to be easily transferable from your corporate office to your staff to the consumers. Like, there's 3 different layers here of information exchange. So it has to be easily understandable by anybody.
Yeah, 100%. And that, we have 550 stores, 99.9% of them have a service case, right? And so there's a team member element to each of these. Yep. So it's not just about putting words on a pack and letting customers kind of like learn what they want to learn. A lot of times it is that, face-to-face communication is where they're learning the most of this information.
So the last few questions, I think we have shifted into the consumer realm. And so I'm going to continue to piggyback off of that. So consumers are increasingly aware and sometimes skeptical about sustainability claims. How does Whole Foods work to maintain trust with shoppers when it comes to ethical sourcing and product labeling?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've chatted about kind of reinforces some of that. But I think ultimately it's about having a really strong program that has important tenets and how we then right? Make that, you can download our entire policy on farm raised fin, fish, and shrimp, right? You can go and read all 50 pages of what a producer is required to do. And then we have third party audits and things like that also come into place. And so we start with that transparency piece. We want to be as, clear as we can be about here's all the things that we are doing for you to trust us. Mm-hmm. And then it goes back to that team member education piece, right? Throughout our team, it's not only the team members in store, but it's the team members that I have, sitting outside my office who are focused on, buying all of the seafood and sourcing the seafood for our stores. It's like there is a base level commitment that we need to have from our suppliers to meet our demands. And so all of those things kind of work in concert with each other to then ultimately end up at the seafood counter with this amazing, fresh, high quality seafood that meets this bar. And so, there's a lot of training that goes into it. There's a lot of knowledge sharing, information that gets passed on its way throughout the chain, whether it be on invoices or emails or conference calls, to make sure that team members are ultimately in that place where they can articulate, this is what this means. And then I would say that most of the time, 95% of the time, most customers are just, they're right there with you. And they're like, okay, great, right? I trust this place that I come into on a regular basis. The product quality is great. I've known this team member for a long time. I trust them. And then there's the 5% who need a little bit more information. And those are the ones that I love because, it's like, then you really get to engage them and understand what are their concerns and how can we help? I mean, we've always heard customers are always like, I don't eat farm raised fish. And it's like, and why not? Right. And then you start, I want to hear that customer come up and say those words to our team members so that then you can start that dialogue around, well, here's what it means to buy farm raised fish at Whole Foods Market, right? This is what these, this salmon meets this bar. So what have you heard? What are you worried about? And then you give them all the information they need. And that, like nowhere else in the supermarket, having that connection with someone is so important in seafood. People don't always know how to cook it. They don't know that it's fresh. They have all these concerns. So when you can build that connection, it makes a world of difference. And so we've had, I can point to times in my career where I've worked with a customer would come in and you can just change their mind. And then next thing you know, they're buying every farm raised fish that we have to offer because they now trust us. And that's such a great experience to open their eyes to new and different things and change their mind.
So going a little off the book here, I am just listening to you talk about all these different topics that are seafood related makes me think that our listeners will probably hear your title of Senior Vice President of Merchandising for Perishables and think, well, he doesn't just do seafood. Yes, this is a seafood podcast, but I'm curious if you can walk us through what is a typical day in the life of balancing the entirety of perishables, merchandising for perishables, because I can imagine that's seafood has a lot of complexity, but when you add in all of the perishables, that's a whole other ball game.
Yeah, it is. It's wild. And to be honest, I have an amazing team of really long tenured Whole Foods Market team members who, have deep subject matter expertise in their areas of responsibility. And so that sets a really strong foundation around, where we want to go from a program perspective. I've had the great luxury of being able to travel all over the world and get to experience a lot of meeting our suppliers, going to our stores, going to competitors, and really understanding the landscape of retail landscape when it comes to perishables. And so a lot of it is more about, aligning on where we're going as a company and our goals for each category and what we're trying to kind of push forward, and then leaving it to the great team members that I have to really deliver, the exceptional business results that we're looking for. And so ultimately, I put a lot of trust and faith in that group of people to help deliver that. I will say that I'm also lifelong curious learner, and I get to dive as deep as I want to in some of these topics and really get to experience some really amazing visits and really start to understand different topics that kind of impact different parts of our programs. And It's so funny, right? When you boil it all down, none of them are that different from each other, right? They're all perishable. They all have supply and demand challenges. They all have customer challenges, whether, you have some preconceived notion or not. And then it's really just about delivering what customers' expectations are every day. And how you get there is the really hard part, but it's definitely been just an absolute pleasure to kind of go from being like a seafood expert for 20 years of my career to now expanding that out into other parts of the store.
So we're going to keep this next question on you. And I think our audience is going to really appreciate this question. You've talked about this, but you've spent almost 3 decades with Whole Foods. What keeps you passionate about the work? And what advice would you offer any young professional that's looking to make a meaningful impact in the seafood or grocery industry?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this question. I've been doing some more different events within our company as well. And so we have this thing called Growing with Purpose, where we go to our stores and we have these sort of store-wide events where we're talking to team members. And so it's an area that I'm super passionate about, having a long and fruitful career with a company like this, where, starting behind the counter, I feel like I have a lot to share with team members about what their potential career journey could look like, as well as, right, again, back to that earlier point about being able to travel and meet with a lot of different suppliers, and, having just been in Alaska and in Bristol Bay and, watching and being a part of the fishing happening there during like peak sockeye season was absolutely amazing, right? And being able to meet with individual farmers, family fishers, and folks who are like working on those same waters in areas for 40 years and just having this real like tie to that community. Those are the experiences that I love to bring back to our team and share with them, right? To help them understand a little bit more of what the opportunities are out there. And then, from there, it's really, when I talk to team members in stores, it's about what do they want to do, right? Like where does when I was, 20 something years old working on the fish counter, I had no idea, right? This is where my career journey was going to take me. And so it's more about like in the short term, it's like, what's the next couple of years look like for you? Like, what do you want to do? If you're you're an assistant team leader of a department, do you want to be a team leader, right? Like, what does that look like? What are some of the areas that you need to be thinking about? As well as, when I started, there was always this journey that was sort of like in one direction. Like I was the seafood guy at Whole Foods for a very long time, which is great. And I love that journey. But I think now more than ever, as I've branched out and seen other parts of the business, there's a real opportunity as well, to get outside of some of those things where it really challenges you as an individual and says, okay, seafood department teams are, 5 to 10 people. Go join the produce team. It's 40 people, right? Go run one of our e-com teams where it's 100 people, right? Like think differently about some areas of the business that really stretch you as a leader. And that to me, as I've gone through it, has now really set me up for what the next thing is in my career, to say like, because I think the thing that people underestimate in themselves is that all the things that they learned that make them a subject matter expert along the way, a lot of that is transferable to other areas of the business. Right. It just takes a little bit of time to get comfortable and understand how to put those things in place. But as you start to do that, now you are like in this situation where you can go wherever you want to go. And there's going to be, instead of having one opportunity, there's 10 opportunities, right? So that to me is like sort of some of the things that I coach team members on. The other thing is that you have to just, while you're in it, is just work hard, do your best, right? Learn as much as you can learn about what you're focused on. And when the time is right, like look for that next opportunity.
It's really good advice. I do want to ask, so you're originally from Massachusetts?
Yes, born and raised Massachusetts. All my family is still in the greater Boston area.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'm from Newburyport,
awesome.
So
yeah, love that area.
Family.
It's great this time of year, especially, right?
Yeah, right. This is the best time of year.
Well, Wes, thank you again for taking the time, and we will chat with you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Wes.
Folks, that was our conversation with Wes. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Make sure to check out our show notes for additional resources, As always, you can follow Aquademia on X if you're not already. Find the handle at Aquademia Pod and click that follow button. If you want to contact us for any reason, we do have an online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave the podcast a rating or review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to us.
And we'll see you at the next episode.
Bye.
Ciao.